Hi everyone, welcome to this ICHK panel discussion. And today we're going to be sharing some elements of the ICHK 5+1 pastoral model and how parents can use it to support their children outside of school, especially during these times of online learning. My name is Sean McDermott. I'm the Deputy Head of School here at ICHK, and I'm joined by my colleagues Flora Lai, Director of Upper School and IB Coordinator, Ross Parker, Director of Technology and Assessment, and Catherine Long, our Head of Learning Support. Thank you all for joining us here. So this has been a challenging year, to say the least, and we have noticed that students are missing the stability of regular school attendance and especially that social contact. What I would like to do is start by discussing ICHK's 5+1 model and talk about and explain why it's so central to everything we do here at ICHK. And what I'd like to do is share with our parents and our community members how we can use this model to support children and learning at home. So Ross, can I start with you? Can you give us a brief overview of the 5+1 model?
So I think at every school in the world, teachers have an internal model of their students and what their students' needs are and how they learn best. Right. What's very different at ICHK is that we formalize that model across the school, and that's what we call 5+1. And so that is 5 major thinkers from educational and psychological theory whose work we admire and whose work we have applied in the past. And we've brought them together because specifically we think those 5 speak to the needs of our students, but they also mesh very well with each other. So the more you understand one, the more you see the way that it reinforces the others. So the 5 elements that make up the 5+1 model come from eminent thinkers within education and psychology. And we've brought them together because we feel that they really complement each other. And the stronger we become in our understanding of each of those, the more it impacts our overall practice as teachers and the school community. So those 5 elements include Eric Burns's work on transactional analysis, right? Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset, Lev Vygotsky's work on the learning zone or the zone of proximal development, Eric Burns's work, Kieran Egan's work on language development and the way that impacts thinking. Right. And then finally, Erik Erikson's work on the 5 stages of psychosocial development. Sure. And whilst that all sounds very technical, as a staff, we've come to study these ideas over a number of years and to learn how they can impact who we are as teachers and what we expect from our students. And it really enables us to deliver something quite different as a school. So the +1 element of the model refers to the individual learner. And it reminds us of the fact that all students have individual needs. It's not just a selection of students that require sort of a personalized approach to education, but it also serves to remind us that these models are just that. They're models that describe sort of generalization of humans, and we never want to invest too heavily in any one of them. We always want to keep the individual student in mind.
Right. Thanks, Ross. So how is ICHK consistently able to apply this model during these times of online learning? How do you think we do that?
I think we're in a solid position in regards to that because we've been using the model, developing, refining, and learning about the model for many years already, probably 5 or 6 years. Sure. And so for our existing staff, who have been at ICHK for a while, we're very well versed in it, and it really does inform a lot of our day-to-day practice as teachers. Mm-hmm. For newer teachers who join us, they receive some specific 5+1 introductory training, and then they're able to join in a range of ongoing conversations that happen sort of formally and informally around school. So building on that foundation, I think we've all just internalized enough of 5+1 that it actually is who we are and how we teach. Sure. We're all bathed in this culture. And so I'm not sure it's taken anything extra or anything specific during the closure. I think the culture's been strong enough to keep that at the fore. Sure. where it is challenging is understanding that learning is very different online, and that we need to adapt our approaches, but always within that model.
Yes. Great. Thank you, Ross. Flora, can I come to you? One of the key elements of our 5+1 model is growth mindset. Why is it so important to have a growth mindset as students move through their years of schooling?
So I guess on a more practical level, having a growth mindset is about this idea that with practice and effort, one can always do better. And so I think this is key to helping students all through the years, actually, and to learn in a productive and effective way. I think it helps them develop the skills that are needed to overcome hurdles and obstacles, for example. And as a result of that, students then tend to develop resilience and grit in their learning.
Sure.
I also think that having a growth mindset makes learning more enjoyable for the students. And when students enjoy doing something, they tend to obtain or get more out of it.
Yes.
So I think it's a bit of a positive feedback loop. I'm a scientist, so we talk about feedback loop all the time in science. But I think it can be applied here as well. So students who have a growth mindset would learn more effectively, they would learn more happily, and that in itself then reinforces that idea of having a growth mindset.
Yes. All right. Thanks, Flora. Catherine, can I come to you? How can parents develop or help to develop a growth mindset in their children, and what sort of language should they use? How should they sort of build these conversations and develop these positive habits around growth mindset?
So I think as parents, what you really want to be trying to do is put the emphasis on the trying and the effort process rather than the achievement and the outcome.
Right.
So, I mean, of course, everyone wants to achieve, and children who maybe don't vocalize it, obviously sometimes deep within them, they do want to achieve, and we can still celebrate achievement. But I think the language you want to be using is to be talking more about effort, talk more about perseverance and working through their frustrations rather than just giving up. So avoid saying things like, oh, well, you're so smart, well done for being smart, well done for being clever, and try to reward them for the trying and the effort.
Yeah.
So if you've got an older child, I think, and they're approaching exams, try to say things to them like, I'll be proud of you, whatever happens, as long as you try your best.
Yeah.
Rather than saying, I expect I expect you to do well, I expect you to have
this outcome. Yeah.
And I think, you may know that they haven't given their best effort, okay? And you might think, well, I don't want to say that because I don't think they have really tried. But I think you have to realize that they know when they haven't given their best effort, and it will help them to reflect. So even if you just keep saying that sort of language, as long as you try your best, whatever happens, they will internalize that as well.
Sure.
Okay, so it's not like giving them a free pass to not do well. We still they can still reflect on it themselves. Sometimes they might get a low result that they're not happy with, and they might say things like and they might be upset with it. So I think say to them things like, well, what could you change for next time? How can you learn from this? Can I help you in any way? Instead of things like, why is that grade so low? Why didn't you revise? I told you should have done it like this. So come at it from a think of, well, okay, so you didn't do well. Let's look at how we can learn from failure. And that's the whole point of the growth mindset, is that we look at how we can learn, and we don't just say, I failed, therefore I cannot change. It's always about growing and developing from that.
Yes.
And obviously as parents, sometimes we can never say the right thing ever.
No.
But keep praising them for trying harder, for the effort. Even if they reject that now, I say stick with it.
Sure. Thanks, Catherine.
Could I just add one thing there, which is
Yes,
I think traditional schooling, and because all parents, or almost all parents of our generation went to much more traditional schools, we're all very much trained in fixed mindset thinking. And so this kind of shift doesn't always come naturally, and it takes a conscious effort. And I think that's equally true in schools. There's a lot of schools that talk about Carol Dweck's work and suggest that they apply it, yet their language and their use of grades particularly still reflects a fixed mindset. And so I think we have to appreciate that this is really difficult. It is a challenge, but yeah, I think we're all up for the challenge.
Yeah,
and
certainly.
I think it's important to remember also that the 5+1 model should be seen as a whole rather than these individual strands.
Sure.
And although we are currently talking about having a growth mindset, I think it goes hand in hand with some other aspects of the 5+1 model as well.
Yeah, that's right.
Speaking about transactional analysis, which is important in reinforcing that growth mindset in students as well when we're having these conversations with students.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you all. Speaking of transactional analysis, actually, Ross, can you? It's an important part of the culture here at ICHK. Can you explain how its insights are built into our approaches to learning, and how parents might be able to use transactional analysis at home with their children?
Yep. So transactional analysis, which is a little bit tricky to say, and so often we just say TA for short. TA evolved from some dissatisfaction amongst psychotherapists in the 1960s. And so it's already quite an established set of theories, even though it's not so fashionable today. But it really provides us with ways to think about who we are as individuals and how we transact or interact with other people. And to get a handle on the basics, is a couple of hours of sort of study. But once you've got the basics, you can start building on that and advancing your knowledge. And once you've invested a certain amount of time, TA, to my mind, is one of the most powerful ways to understand who you are, why you feel the way that you do, and why other people exert an influence on you, and why you exert an influence on them.
Sure.
And so it's an inherently personal and social tool. And in that, it overlaps considerably with our approaches to learning, in that so much of what we do in approaching learning, in being in class as teachers and students, comes down to who we are and how we regulate ourselves and how we interact with others and how we allow others to regulate who we are, or how we fail to manage that. And so with more teachers at ICHK having a better understanding of TA, we're better able to model what are called adult-to-adult transactions, which is a particular way of getting on with people. But we're also aware of the other states that can be useful for us, so positive nurturing parent or positive free child. And we can choose to switch between those states sort of as part of the craft of teaching and engaging our students. And so TA forms the sort of bedrock of a lot of our relationships, and then that appears in our approaches to learning, of how we assess students in their abilities to learn.
How do you think parents would sort of conduct a conversation in a way that's inspired by TA?
I think a good way to think about that is the opposite. So think about the traditional parenting conversations that we all had as children, and that we then, as TA says, we recorded and we then impose on our own children. So the wagging of the finger and scolding and that kind of traditional critical parent. So adult-to-adult conversations are a distinct move away from that. It's not about blame. It's not about morality. It's about what is best for both parties right now in the present moment.
Sure.
And so, for example, Sean, if you were one of my students and you'd done something terribly naughty, as a more traditional teacher, when I started teaching many years ago, I would have really imposed my unhappiness about your choices on you and made that very clear to you in order to force you into what we call adapted child. And you would have said, "Yes, Mr. Parker, I'm terribly sorry, I didn't mean to do it," right?
Yeah.
Under TA, I'm much more likely to say, "Well, Sean, that's a really interesting choice that you've just made when you hit Bob on the head. Why is it that you chose to do that?" And then you would say, "Well, Bob did this thing to me." And so we'd then draw Bob into the conversation, and we'd go round and around, and it would be much less accusatory, much less emotional, and much more directed to resolution.
Sure.
And hopefully you and Bob and I would all walk away from that conversation thinking, oh, they're not such bad people. We can all get along.
Yeah.
And the emotional tone of the classroom is then much more friendly and less aroused. And
Yep.
we can build learning more effectively from there.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Flora, can I just come to you with this? With so much change and sort of being in school and then being back online and school and online and backwards and forwards and half days and full days, how can parents encourage their children to remain motivated and engaged and support them sort of in a positive learning space?
Well, I'm a parent myself. I have a little 6-year-old at home, and echoing what Ross was saying about TA, we're all, I think, part of the learning process. So we're absolutely not saying that we've got it perfectly right all the time.
Yeah.
And so I find myself entering that critical parent mode sometimes with my own child, which I have to reflect upon
Yes.
all the time. But I think one of the key things here is frequent communication and conversation with your children, talking to the children about how their school days have gone, for example, and in particular asking them about the more positive aspects of their learning.
Sure.
What did you enjoy most when you went into school today?
Right.
And help students see the more positive side of things. Ask them about their online learning days. There could be something really, really positive out of their online learning days as well.
Yeah.
Which should, I think, help with keeping them engaged and motivated and feeling positive about it all, and which then helps them enter the right learning zone, as it were, and helps them step out of their comfort zones and enter that zone of proximal development, as we call it.
Sure.
Learn more effectively. On a sort of separate, more practical side of things, encouraging them to have a balanced diet, I think, is important. Again, coming back to me as a biologist, I think having a balanced diet is so important in keeping our energy levels on a daily basis. That should really be a big part of our students' lives. Having enough sleep and rest, and also exercising, the more practical ways, I think, of keeping ourselves motivated and engaged. And all of these would help keep their physical energy levels up, and which in turn helps with keeping them motivated and ready to learn.
Sure.
Also, I think helping students with keeping their schoolwork organized can be helpful. In all of this as well. A student who's on top of their schoolwork, for example, often feels quite good about where they're at, and that can help, again, to keep them motivated and engaged, feeling happy about their learning.
About where they are, sure.
And of course, all of the other aspects of the 5+1, having that growth mindset that we've been talking about, keeping these conversations in line with TA are helpful strategies as well in these difficult times.
All right, thank you, Flora. Catherine, so and this conversation from your perspective, if students have more individual or specific needs or some sort of consideration, I mean, how can parents support their children at home from that perspective if there's something else that may be needed? Okay,
so I think overall, I say what we want to try and do is remove barriers to learning as much as possible. And I'm sort of probably going to sort of brainstorm some things now. Some might be relevant to you and your child, and others might not be. Right. So for one thing is obviously at the moment, because we are using so many computers, we can look at is there any software you can put on computers to help with reading. At the moment, we are experimenting with some different software with the kids, particularly in the learning support department. We've got children putting on something called Immersive Reader. And there's also things that, on any device you can have dictation. So, talk to your child, work out what things are hard for them. What are the barriers? Is it looking at, is reading something on screen difficult? Is it getting things down? Would dictating help? And feel free to, get in touch with me if you want any further information on that. I would say try to keep in touch if your child sees a psychologist or anything like that. especially during this time, try to keep in touch with those therapists and professionals, have check-ins, keep up to date with any medication that your child may be taking, maybe go back and see if, you know, it needs readjusting. These are all really important things you want to do. You know, empathize with your child, you know, recognize that, you know, it must be hard for them, particularly if your child struggles to focus, if they have a brain that works at 100 million miles an hour, you know, talk to them about it. Talk about distractions that they may face and what you can do together to minimize them, rather than put the weight of that responsibility purely on them, because they will need your help too. Help them prioritize. I would say encourage them to speak to their teachers. If they are feeling overwhelmed, encourage them to contact teachers about minimizing workload to help them get back on track. Or if your child is very, very anxious about that, you could be that person that helps them to do that, and contact teachers yourselves. I say use rewards. You know, what works for your child might not work for someone else, but think about things, well, you know, and it doesn't even have to be a big thing that they've done. You know, if you know that they're really struggling to, could be even attend a certain lesson, or it could be, you know, that they just can't get themselves to read a book. See if you can motivate them with a reward that you know would work for them. And I would say things like, you know, as a parent, when your child's becoming completely overwhelmed in, for example, in completing work, and I say, step in. Remember, you know, you're still their parent. Step in. You know, if you think that they can't do their work in their room, make a distraction-free space for them, even if it means moving everybody out of the living room. If necessary, turn off the TV, send other siblings away to their rooms, you know, sit down with them, maybe use a timer and stay with them. And if they have to complete a piece of work, and be right with them as they do it, and say, you know, ask, what can I do to help? And just, you know, sometimes you just have to really do something drastic.
Yeah, that's right.
Sitting in their room upstairs and worrying and getting overwhelmed, feel, you know, you are positioned to be able to step in at home and do something about it, and explain to them that, you know, taking back some control, doing something will make them feel better about themselves. So I think it's quite a few
well, there's a lot there, but no, very, very, you know, very helpful.
I think as well as a school, we'll always support those parents that advocate for their children and want our help to help their children. And I think what you said, Catherine, is really important. And sometimes it's confusing with TA because we talk about adult to adult conversations rather than being in the parent state, but you can be adult and still be the parent. I think that's very important.
Absolutely. Ross, I mean, because of the length of this pandemic, we've sort of, among some of our students, we're starting to see, or have seen, a lowering of energy levels, sort of comfort zones, you know, sort of willingness to take risks and try new things may have shrunk. How can we keep developing confident and ambitious and fearless learners despite the sort of the constraints that we're facing at the moment?
I think one of the concerns is that students will fall behind developmentally during this time and then not be able to catch up, as it were. But in some respects, I think students will learn a lot from this experience in that they will bounce back. You know, children are very resilient. They'll have a lot of support in school. We'll help warm them up and get them back in when the time comes. So I think there's an element of this in which we need to not panic and not push too hard, and we need to help students as best we can in a pressure-free environment that's very supportive, knowing that they will sort of come back online, as it were, once we're back at school. And it can be difficult, I think, to trust in that and to be patient. And the difficulty is the more pressure we add, the more we squeeze children, actually the worse the problem will become.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, carry on.
I think if we are willing to give kids space and permission to have bad days and to struggle, and to show them that we have those same struggles ourselves, and to be empathetic, I think our relationships will stay intact and actually can become stronger. And that's what's going to count when we are all back full time.
Yeah, that's right. Sort of continuing with this theme, Flora, The talk of students and children needing to catch up. Sort of, what are your thoughts on that? And how should parents approach these conversations, do you think?
Yes, I think it's important to recognize that we shouldn't shy away from that phrase. Sometimes, saying that the children need to catch up on something is part of their learning journeys. So in terms of the upper school, and in particular in IB years, I would say that staying organized and on top of their work as much as possible would be the best for the students, as they are aiming towards some public exams or have coursework deadlines that ultimately need to be submitted to public exam boards and so on. And so in that regard, students in the lower school should have less catching up to do, in the sense that they should just try and engage themselves in classes as much as they can still, but they shouldn't have as much pressure around meeting deadlines and submitting coursework that need to be submitted to exam boards and so on. However, having said that, in all years, student well-being, I have to say, must come first. So if parents feel that their children are under too much pressure and are showing signs that they are getting increasingly anxious about schoolwork and under pressure, and generally just looking, tired, exhausted, despite having enough sleep or can't get to sleep, and just feeling sad and overwhelmed all the time, please do let us know, and we will do our best to try and work out ways in which we can support these students further.
Thanks, Flora. Catherine, what's your perspective, catching up?
Very similar to Flora's. Again, yes, in the upper school, we can talk about catching up because yes, we've got exams and public exams to complete. But I think we have to remember, as far as ICHK is concerned, the teachers are well in control of delivering content. So parents don't have to worry about catching up with content in that respect. Maybe for individual students, again, they just need to keep on top of their own work. But that's very much, I think, in hand with most students covering content in class. For the younger ones, again, it's really more about their personal, social, emotional development is far more important at this stage. And remember, and I don't know if when you think back to being a child yourself, there are some things that you couldn't do at a certain age. And remember, the brain is developing, and all of a sudden things can click in at later ages. So let's not worry too much if we think that they can't write the perfect essay yet in year 8, and maybe they've missed opportunity to do it. Things will naturally fall into place as they get older. So let's not worry too much, really. It's more, as Flora said, it's really the well-being is paramount.
Absolutely, give them the space.
I think as well, if as a parent, if you find exam results are on your mind a lot, it's worth keeping in mind that exam results are normalized and they're comparative, and globally all students are more or less in the same boat. So your child, in fact, if we're thinking about catching up, doesn't need to catch up with a student of their age from 3 years ago. Actually, they need to maintain parity with their peers, all of whom are similarly disadvantaged. And I find that quite a calming thing to think about, that there's no absolute standard here.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. To finish, can each of you please share one quick practical suggestion for parents to help them create the conditions for successful learning during this time? Flora, can we start with you?
Of course, yes. Can I do two?
Two, yes.
Yes, I think I'd quite like to reinforce the 5+1 as well. So, keep having that growth mindset, keep stepping out of your comfort zones, keep encouraging students to do that, keep having those conversations, having TA in mind, but on a more practical level, and as I mentioned earlier, sleep, rest, exercise, keep a balanced diet, have a quiet working environments that you feel comfortable working if you are learning online or if you're working at home.
Great, thank you, Flora. Catherine, what are your thoughts?
My big tip for all ages is to give your kids a whiteboard and some whiteboard markers in their room. A whiteboard is brilliant because it's flexible. Things can be wiped off, but it can be very permanent as well. Things don't get lost if you know something's written on the whiteboard. It's very visual. You can put timetables on there. You can put reminders on there. You can consolidate things that have already been learnt. It's fun. Kids love to pretend to be teacher. It's very engaging. So my tip is the whiteboard.
Thanks, Catherine. And Ross?
For me, I think just really honest, non-judgmental conversations with your child. And this is much harder as a parent than as a teacher. I can attest to that from personal experience. But allowing your children to make mistakes, discussing with them how they can do things better, and sharing your own mistakes and your own trials and tribulations, and not having to feel perfect as a parent. So that children know that it's okay to not be okay all the time.
Right. Thank you, Ross. And thank you all so much for joining us today. We've covered a huge amount of ground and enormously helpful. So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today. Please don't forget, as my colleague said, we're very much here to help. Don't hesitate to get in touch with us if there's ever anything we can do to support you and your children as we move through these uncertain times. And thank you all so much again. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.